And see, that's where Buddhism falls short. Why? Buddhism has total coherence, and on top of that, it has compassion. That's what the bodhisattva concept is about, to add compassion, karuna, to the pragya, right? Pragya alone is not a sufficient energy that can create wholeness. You have to have compassion. But is compassion enough? You see? Why does the bodhisattva have compassion for beings who don't exist? Right? There is real compassion. But if the compassion is fictional, then it doesn't reach nirvana. It is only a compassion that is an appearance, right? So it's sincere at the level of appearance, but it still lacks a self. The self doesn't have compassion because there's no one to have compassion for. But the self does have bliss, joy. And that joy is so overwhelming and infinite that to the characters within the field of bliss that is Shiva, Sat Chit Ananda, right? Within that field, it will be experienced as love and as ecstasy, right? Mahasukha. And that's why the Tantric Buddhists shifted nirvana from being lights out to parties on, right? And the party is on if you know we're in nirvana right now. What's there to wait for? You know, yeah, we did it, you know. There's no, I'm struggling to become a bodhisattva and after many, many cycles I'll get everybody up there and I'll be able to relax, you know. No, that's a total fantasy. Why is it a fantasy that has to be part of it? Because you cannot have an ego without a superego, you see? And the superego is the demand that you be good. You be compassionate. You serve all these people. You can't be selfish and just go to nirvana and leave all these people to suffer, right? There has to be a superego. Now, you can have a superego as your mother, you know, from childhood who is still attacking you or, you know, telling you you're not enough or whatever, or your father or whatever. You're going to have superego voices that are commanding the ego to feel certain ways, usually lack, right? I couldn't make them happy, you know? I wasn't enough for them. They're suffering. It's my fault, you know? And so the ego is there to take the brunt of the blame for why the world is not working and why your family was miserable and traumatic in order to make you feel real. And if you're in anguish, you feel real. If you're just peaceful and you recognize you don't really exist, you know, you're not real. But that is reality, you see? So in the same way that in this chapter that I read from the Diamond Sutra, he says if you believe in a soul even, you can't be a bodhisattva, right? So what does that mean? There is no identifiable intelligence that can claim the possession of the I. Right? The great I am belongs to no one.
Thank you. I have a couple follow-up points or questions. One of them was kind of in my mind when you were describing these two emptinesses, which, again, the second emptiness I know is what you're referring to, but I was surprised that if you reach the first emptiness, which you described as Buddha nature, that the fullness wouldn't naturally come. Like, I'm surprised that it wouldn't be a natural arising.
Okay, I wouldn't call it the Buddha nature because it was called at that point with the single emptiness theory, nirvana. Or emptiness, shunyata, right? That was the word that was used by most of the Mahayana Buddhists. So if emptiness is all that is real because the world has no juice, right? It's got to be inflated by a consciousness that's outside of itself. Otherwise, it doesn't play, right? It's a DVD, let's say, or a USB if you want. But if it's not being clicked on and played, it doesn't exist, right? So in the same sense, that's always what's going on. There's an implicate order of information that wants to play itself out. But it's not you. It's just information.
Okay. And then the other thing that when you were talking about this reciprocal relationship of the love for this intelligence and then that love that is received back, I think that I couldn't write it all down, but there was this, and I think you might have even mentioned something about this to Michelle, but there's a union there in that love for God and then the reciprocal love for the character.
Yeah, God's love.
But this actually made me think of when you were talking about the hitting of the arrow to the target, because you also talked about a union there, and I was wondering two things. Is that the same thing that you're referring to? And you mentioned many times in that teaching the first night the quality of concentration, and so it made me wonder about the relationship between devotion and concentration, actually.
Very good question. I think devotion creates the ability to concentrate. Because until you have an object that you're devoted to, you have no reason to concentrate your energies, because it's looking for enemies. It's dispersed, it's vigilant, it's like a radar thing in all directions to try to figure out what's going on in this scene here. And so it can't leave that behind in order to know itself, right? It's a luxury. Because in order to do that, you have to not care what happens to the character while you're in nirvana, right? You have no control. And the ego is a control mechanism. So it has to be deactivated in order for that Buddha nature to be realized.
Thank you. I really actually appreciate that, because the question that I had was, well, what if I can concentrate, but it's on these lower enemies or these lower distractions? Maybe that's not even true concentration, or it's concentration being used in a way that's not going to be life-giving.
That's what most egos do. There's a particular drive. I'm looking for something. They know the fix that they need, and they're looking for it, right? So the ego is always on the prowl for its fix. But who fixed it to have that fixation, you see? And therefore, who can deprogram that particular addiction and instead turn it into adoration?
So would you say if there's an element of our character's life, let's say on this plane, that we're having a hard time concentrating on and completing or focusing on, to cultivate a sense of love for it, or what would be the...
You have to become a literary critic and say, what is this character expressing? If I were an artist, the artist who wrote this character into the play, what was I trying to bring out that could only be expressed intersubjectively by a character with that particular worldview and set of attitudes, etc.? What is it that being, that mandala of energies is emanating into the world?
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm waiting to answer.
Oh, I'm not going to get off that easy. I mean, what comes first, because what actually I was thinking about in this moment is the completion of a choice I need to make about something very mundane, something that I need to choose for a project. And I see I'm avoiding it. And I think in a way, what comes to me is that this character feels way too identified with those choices, and therefore would find a sense of freedom in choosing and moving on. I don't know, like that's kind of what I like. The crux of it is like it's too much of an expression of myself, and I can't be defined, because what if it's not perfect, or what if it's not beautiful, or...
But aren't you defining yourself as someone afraid to be defined?
Well, of course.
And by doing that, aren't you making yourself into a glob instead of a sculpture, but just a fuzzy non-image that nobody can figure out because it doesn't have any lines or any particular shape, right?
Yeah.
So being a shapeshifter has its pros and its cons because you're not actually in charge of the shifts that are happening. And maybe that's an important point in order to have the wisdom to say, that character is now obsolete. I got the message. Let's create a new one using this instrument.
Okay.
Or none.
Hachi. Thank you.
Who are you thanking?
Ah.
I don't exist either. I just don't make any, bones about it. There's nothing to worry about. Why? You don't really want to exist. See, that's the problem. Most people don't want to be nobody, son of nobody,
Yeah.
right? Or daughter of nobody, whatever. But sorry, that's your name, whether you want it to be or not, right? There's no alternatives.